Welcome back to the pregame. Today's a mailbag episode where we dig into your emails and break down real situations from the field. We'll cover Connor's ejection report, Gary's DH question, Brad's take on catcher's obstruction, and Mark's tricky interference plays. And this episode is sponsored by Diamond MMA and Umpire Classroom's 2026 preseason course. Listen, returning umpires deserve better. Too often, associations run 1 or 2 or 3 mandatory trainings before the year starts, and it's always geared towards rookies. But because it's the only training being offered, they require their veterans sit through the Umpire 101 training for the 10th time. That's disrespectful, it hurts morale, and it discourages your most dedicated members. That's why we built Umpire Classroom's preseason course. It's online, on-demand training, updated every season, free for associations to implement, and cheaper for umpires than mileage to meetings and the time you might have to take off of the court or away from family or away from work to attend traditional meetings. So if you're ready to respect your members and modernize your training, learn more at umpireclassroom.com or email me directly with your questions at patrick@umpireclassroom.com. This email comes from Connor asking for feedback on his ejection report and the way he handled the situation. So we'll read through the ejection report, talk about what I might change in it or what my thoughts are on it, and then we'll discuss how either the situation or the report could be changed to create a better scenario for the umpire. So first, let's look at how the scenario is laid out in the email. Now, note that I did change all the variables in here so that you can't identify where this happened, but we'll still go through all the variables to discuss how they're laid out. Of course, we do have the essentials. We have the field, the age group, who we're umpiring with, the home team and the away team, along with the name and team of the individual who was ejected. We then include the reason, which was unsportsmanlike conduct and actions intended to intimidate. So I think this hits most of the variables that we need to go through the ejection report. I probably would have liked to have seen the inning of the ejection, but my guess is, and what's going to happen, is we'll get that pretty quickly when we get into the report. So, into the report. In the middle of the first inning, the head coach of Florida, the home team, Greg, brought it to my attention that he thought the mound looked closer than 50 feet. My partner came over and confirmed that he also thought the mound looked closer than it should be. We then told both coaches the mound would be moved. Virginia, the visitors, said that they weren't going to play until the mound got measured to 50 feet. The grounds crew was called over and they used a measuring tape to mark out 50 feet. We then instructed Virginia, the visitors, to take the field. Landon, the visiting head coach for Virginia, protested, saying that since they had to hit off a mound being too close to the plate, they should either have the opportunity to pitch on a shorter mound or the game should be restarted. We told him no, and he protested our ruling. We followed procedures due to protests on rules being allowed in the tournament. The protest went to the tournament director, and he upheld our decision to continue the game with the mound at the correct distance. We informed head coach Virginia that the game would continue with the mound at the correct position. He objected, saying that it was unfair to his team and that they were protesting the game. I told him that wasn't how it worked and that we allowed his protest and were given a ruling. Now that the ruling was issued by the director, we had to continue. I instructed him to get his team on the field to begin play and that we were done with this argument. Virginia continued to argue the ruling and was given the verbal warning due to him continuing to argue after being told that we were done talking. After receiving the verbal warning, Virginia, visitors, got about a foot from me, bowed up his chest, and got in my face saying, "You're wrong and you've been wrong about this whole thing." I then ejected him because he was trying to intimidate me by bowing up and getting in my face. He then yelled at me, wondering why he got ejected, to which I said, "You used actions intended to intimidate me, which can result in an ejection." He then left the field to get the tournament director, and I did not see him for the rest of the game. So I want to start by just discussing the mound being at the wrong distance. I've never worked a game where the mound was at the wrong distance. I know how it could happen on a field. I've worked on fields where the mound is movable. But more commonly, I've seen the bases set to the wrong distance. And when that happened, we usually noticed, sometimes you notice at the beginning of the game when you walk out there. Other times you don't notice until somebody brings it up. If we were in an inning and had started with the wrong distance, we're going to continue that inning with the wrong distance. I don't think it's a fair opportunity if you're going to swap it up in the middle of the inning, especially when it gives a disadvantage to one team. I don't really understand why we wouldn't have done that in this scenario. I think you should have just finished the first inning with the mound where it was, and then after the first inning, done your measurement and gotten the mound right. But, you went through with what you decided to go with. Now, then we get to the protest, and you had to do whatever you were instructed to do by the league or the tournament, whatever you're working. It sounds like in this scenario, you had to get the tournament director, and they had to give you a final ruling. You did that, and they backed your ruling, so that's good. Whatever logic you used in it, they supported and agreed with. And once you have that, then it's done. There's no more steps to take. Now, when we get on to the next part of it, and I thought this is where your ejection report could have used improvement, you commonly referred to the head coach of the offending team, Landon. You kept referring to him as Virginia, aka you were referring to him as the team name, but you want to try to use the individual's name, especially when we're ejecting him for his own actions. We weren't ejecting him for things coming out of his dugout or, his crowd or his players. It sounded like you wanted to eject him for what he was doing, and him specifically, so you really need to try to put in more direct quotes by him, but also tie the actions to him, not just generically his team. That was the biggest flaw that I saw in the ejection report, was confusion there. Now let's move on to the reason of the ejection, which you put down unsportsmanlike conduct and actions intended to intermediate. I think you meant intimidate. I don't know if the autocorrect was on your end or maybe my document did it somehow. But that does get us to another point, an aside, which is that anytime I'm turning in an ejection report, anytime I have an umpire turning in an ejection report, you need to run it through either a Grammarly or a Word doc, or just run it through ChatGPT or one of those to get your grammatical corrections, as well as to, ask it for questions about, hey, how can I clarify this report? Or what questions do you, ChatGPT, have after reading this initial report? I think that would have been very helpful here. And another big thing too is that we often end up with reports like this that are just a large block of text. We need to break it up into paragraphs. You're trying to make this easy for your reader to digest. And this becomes more and more important the higher the level you get, because the ejection report goes to more and more individuals. That's especially true when we get to high school and collegiate levels, where these ejections carry suspensions and fines. We need to make it as easily digestible for whoever has to read this and then make a determination of the other penalties. So really focus on making it grammatically easy to go through. Now, you wanted to cite actions intended to intimidate, but I would have gone with prolonged arguing here. And more often than not, prolonged arguing is what I'm going to go with. But anytime we basically get to the that's enough or we're done discussing this, the next step is most likely going to be a continuing to argue. So that's what I would have rather put here, and then just put in a little bit more about the process of that. And when we work through a process of continuing to argue after being told to stop, then we really get to focus on hitting the 5 steps: ignore, acknowledge, respond, warn, and eject. Now in this scenario, we weren't going to ignore, we weren't going to acknowledge, we pretty much had respond, warn, and eject. So after you get the decision that we're going to continue playing, you got your protest decision, then we're pretty much at respond and warn. In the MLB, once they go to replay and get a ruling, there is no more conversation. It's an immediate ejection. We obviously don't have replay at this level, and we probably have a little bit more bandwidth. But once we got to this point of you coming back on and saying, we're going to play, that's what we were told, that's what we're going to go with, then I might have given him just like one little bit of instruction or maybe one more comment about it. But after that, I would have warned him, and probably warned him multiple times, we're done with this discussion. You need to go back to the dugout. You need to get the team out here. We got to play. Now, I would have possibly given him both a regular warning and then a written warning to restrict him to the dugout. I don't know if that was the case with whatever league you were working in, but I would have warned him here and then dugout restricted him. And then if he continued arguing, then I would have ejected him for continuing to argue. So overall, I thought the ejection report was good. I would have definitely broken up the text more, make it a little easier to digest. I would have leaned more heavily into the reason for the ejection being continued arguing or prolonged arguing, and tried to lay out more clearly who the individual was that we ejected, what his actions were through the duration of the event, and tried to hit the 2 warnings I might have gotten him, 2 or 3, before he was ultimately ejected. Our next email comes from Gary. Hey Patrick, thanks for writing so quick after my completion of this great course. I umpired for about 20 years, but that was also about 20 years ago. You forget a lot. Love the course. One question, I never heard of a 10-batter lineup. Am I understanding that right? 9 on the card with a DH, that makes 10, but 9 are hitting. Is there ever a time 10 are hitting? Also, a DH can be for a pitcher or another fielder. Is that right? Finally, I remember years ago in an umpiring class, they said that if a DH goes into the field, you lose the DH. So if a DH goes into the field, what are the reasons? Maybe someone got hurt, then 9 are batting, not 10. Is that right? Thanks, Gary. Well, Gary, let's break that down question by question. First, there's no lineup that has 10 players batting. Now, that could be different if your association or league, whatever you're working in, if they're using an extra hitter, which is common at lower levels than varsity, as well as you'll see it in like some summer collegiate leagues. Again, that just depends on the league, but at least traditional NFHS rules, you're only going to be batting 9 players. Now, it will be listed as 10 starters in the lineup, but that's because one of those is the DH and the other is the player the DH is batting for. But again, unless you're using an extra hitter, there's no scenario where you will have 10 hitters in the lineup. Now, and this is unique to high school versus other rule sets, in high school, you can have a designated hitter batting for any one of the 9 defensive starters. So it doesn't just have to be for the pitcher, but you can have the DH batting for your third baseman, your shortstop, whoever you want it to be. And this works towards your final question about what happens if the DH goes to play defense. Now, the answer to this can be found in the rule book in Rule 3-1-4, which focuses on the designated hitter. And specifically inside of that, we're going to look at the rules regarding using the traditional DH, where you have a 10th player that starts as the designated hitter. It says, the designated hitter may be a 10th starter hitting for any one of the 9 starting defensive players. If the designated hitter is used in this manner, the role of the DH is terminated for the remainder of the game when 1. The defensive player or any previous defensive player for whom the designated hitter batted subsequently bats, pinch hits, or pinch runs for the designated hitter. Or the designated hitter or any previous designated hitter assumes a defensive position. So first of all, that answered your question about 10 starters. As you can see, there are 10 starting players. It's just one of them is only starting on offense and one of them is only starting on defense, thus giving you 9 defensive players and 9 batters. And then if your designated hitter comes in to play defensively, at that point you've burned your DH. And if you think about it, if they come in, let's say your DH comes in for the shortstop, well, then the shortstop is obviously no longer in defensively and they're no longer in offensively. They never were. So at that point, of course, they're out of the game. They do have their re-entry ability, but at least for that moment, they're out of the game. You've gotten rid of the DH and you're just playing with a straight 9. So this email comes from Brad and it says, Hi Patrick, I've been watching some of your videos from up here in Wisconsin and really appreciate the good input. I do have to question your catcher's obstruction rules where you would call obstruction without the batter ever swinging. I don't know of anybody up here that would call that unless there was an actual swing that was obstructed by the catcher. Now, I would say that the baseball here is not at the level it is in Georgia, but do you actually call this rule in reality? Thanks, Brad. Thanks for the email, Brad. I want to clear up some of the confusion here. So with obstruction, obviously we're going to call catcher's obstruction if the batter swings and hits the catcher's glove. What we need to know, though, is that the rules support and encourage that we call catcher's obstruction if the catcher steps on or astride the plate. Now, I've never had to call that in a game in 16 years of doing this. I've called obstruction or catcher's obstruction with a swing maybe 5 times in a career. So you don't call them too often, and we definitely don't call it very often without a swing. There is an example this year, though, of a steal of home in the MLB where the catcher does step on or over the plate and the umpire rules obstruction and scores the runner from third. So, yeah, don't overthink it. We don't call it with no swing unless the catcher steps on or astride the plate. And think of it this way. In those scenarios, if the catcher gets his glove hand hit, it might hurt, but it's not shouldn't severely injure him, right? It should hit the padding and, you got in the way. But if that catcher comes up and stands on the plate or astride it and our batter swings because he's required to for obstruction, if that were the case, well, then we're going to have a catcher getting hit in the back with a metal bat, and we don't want that. So that's part of the logic behind this ruling, that you don't need to swing, is that we don't want scenarios where a batter is swinging to try to get catcher's obstruction called. So again, getting just back to your question, we call it if there's a swing and he makes contact with the catcher, or when there's no swing, if the catcher is standing on or astride the plate. So this email comes from Mark, and the email says, "Hi Patrick, this situation has come up for me twice in the last 10 days, both with different outcomes. Runner on second, stealing third. The catcher makes a throw, and on the follow-through, his hand slams into the batter's helmet. There were 2 strikes, and I called interference. Batter out, runner out. But honestly, I wasn't sure if the batter had actually moved or just stayed in his stance. If the batter doesn't move, is that really interference? Then, yesterday, almost the same thing. Catcher's throw hit the batter's bat and rolled towards the dugout. This time, I had no call. Again, not sure if the batter moved or just stayed still. Nobody argued, but I wasn't 100% confident either way. So my real question is, if the batter moves forward or back and interferes with the throw, what's the call? And if he stays still in the box and the throw hits the bat, what's the correct ruling?" So this can be very difficult for umpires because, again, we're looking at a batter in the box and, he's here, pitch comes through. Now, it sounds like in both scenarios, you ruled the pitch a strike and strike 3, which, of course, would have made the batter out, and then if we have interference, the runner out. So if we called it strike 3, then hopefully he's not trying to duck the pitch or anything like that, anything weird. So I'm picturing him more or less standing still in the box. Now, you could call interference if he just goes from here to here afterwards. You could, because he's leaving his stance that he was in to hit the ball. I think in practice, though, we're not going to call that to that. What we're more looking for is, does his right foot fully move, or does his left foot move forwards, or does he take a step back? But maybe something that's a little more significant than just a couple of inches. Now, if he maintains his position, and that does include just keeping his bat on his shoulder, keeping his bat where it was, then we won't have interference. He's allowed to maintain his position in the box. It's when he does something weird, like drop his bat down or step back like this. In those scenarios, then we would have interference. And this takes experience to get used to calling it in your games. What you're just going to have to get used to is, having an idea where the batter is, but more importantly, as you see the catcher coming up on this, you're seeing the ball come in, but just keeping an eye on the batter out of the corner of your vision and seeing how much his stance may move. If he's doing the right thing, his stance won't move at all. If he's doing the wrong thing, you'll probably see him take a pretty big and noticeable step that causes the interference. So he's protected in the stance he was in, and once he leaves that stance, he's no longer protected and can be called for interference, resulting with less than 2 strikes, him being out, or after 3 strikes, the batter and the runner being called out. Thanks again for sending in your questions. Be sure to keep them coming to patrick@umpireclassroom.com. And don't forget to check out the 2026 Umpire Classroom preseason course. You can send me an email and I'll get you set up to try the 2025 course and get you the details to get you up and running for the 2026 season. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the field.